He sits in an airport terminal holding a boarding pass, refreshing his retirement account. The number's still just over $2 million. That number should feel like enough, yet he scrolls through flight upgrade options and closes it without choosing anything. Nothing urgent is wrong, but nothing feels fully open either. That tension is where the misunderstanding begins. The number looks large in isolation, but it changes once it has to support real life over time. This is the translation gap, where a portfolio stops being a static number and becomes a moving system. Once money flows through taxes, fixed costs, and years ahead, its meaning shifts. And when that shift happens, what $2 million represents becomes far less obvious. The system begins changing the moment a retirement portfolio stops being admired and starts being used. $2 million on a screen looks like one complete object, but retirement does not process money that way. It breaks that number apart. First into yearly withdrawals, then into taxable income, then into monthly cash flow, then into ordinary obligations that keep arriving whether markets are calm or not. That is the translation gap. A large number does not move directly into peace of mind. It has to pass through a series of conversions, and each conversion removes some of the emotional power people attach to the headline number. The first conversion is simple and deceptive. A portfolio is rarely lived as a lump sum. It is lived as a stream. That stream may look healthy on paper, but it is not the same as owning the full reservoir. That is where many retirement stories begin to distort. They show the reservoir and let the viewer imagine the faucet. But the faucet is the real experience. The account may hold millions, but the retiree never spends the whole account. What gets used is a controlled flow that must last through years of uncertainty. That flow is shaped by structure long before it reaches lifestyle. Where the money sits across account types matters. Some dollars sit in tax-deferred space, where later withdrawals become ordinary income. Some sit in already taxed accounts, which changes how the tax system sees that money when it comes out. Some money sits in taxable investment accounts, where the friction looks different again. The portfolio total appears unified, but the internal behavior of the money is divided. It is one number, but it is made of different rule sets. That difference becomes visible only when retirement begins, because that is when the portfolio stops being theoretical. Before retirement, the emotional focus is usually accumulation. The balance rises, progress is visible, and the number itself becomes the story. After retirement, the story changes direction. The balance is no longer just proof of success. It becomes a support mechanism for recurring life. Housing keeps asking for money. Insurance keeps asking for money. Food, transportation, maintenance, subscriptions, repairs, medical costs, travel, family visits, and random surprises keep asking for money. Retirement does not test a portfolio once. It tests that portfolio every month. That is why the same number can feel powerful from a distance, but conditional up close. Once the portfolio is translated into usable cash, ordinary life begins competing with the fantasy attached to the number. $2 million sounds expansive. A monthly spending system feels much narrower, not necessarily strained and not necessarily small, but it has clearer edges. The flow has obligations, timing, tax consequences, and many years attached to it. Another part of the mechanism is that retirement spending is rarely judged only by arithmetic. It is also judged by repetition. 1 year of spending can look manageable. One monthly budget can look reasonable. But retirement is not 1 year. It is a long sequence of years where the same portfolio must keep producing usable money while surviving inflation, market swings, and rising living costs. That changes the psychological meaning of each withdrawal. Money leaving the portfolio is not only current spending, it is future capacity being reduced. The visible balance can still look large, but the retiree is not responding only to what exists today. They are also responding to what the system will still need to do later. That is why the emotional experience of retirement is often more cautious than outsiders imagine. That caution is not always fear. Sometimes it is simply the recognition that a portfolio is not a pile of freedom, but a machine under pressure. There is another shift in this mechanism that often goes unnoticed. Some working life expenses fade after retirement, but retirement also makes other costs more visible. Payroll taxes may disappear, commuting may disappear, formal work routines may disappear, but health insurance, housing costs, property upkeep, and the slow financial weight of aging become harder to ignore because they are no longer hidden inside an earning structure. The retiree now stands closer to the raw economics of everyday life. That creates a different kind of clarity. The number is no longer measured against imagination. It is measured against continuity. Can this flow keep supporting the same life without creating constant strain? Can this system absorb friction without changing the emotional temperature of ordinary decisions? That is the real test. This mechanism does not say that $2 million is weak. It says that the meaning of $2 million depends on how efficiently it becomes spendable life across time. That is the translation gap in full. People think they are chasing a balance, but what they are really chasing is a feeling produced by converting that balance into monthly reality. The number is the raw material. The lived retirement experience is the finished product, and between those two things, a great deal changes. Take two retirees who both leave work with the same portfolio value, $2 million. On paper, they appear to have arrived at the same destination. The number is the same, the milestone is the same, and the outside impression is almost identical. But the similarity begins to weaken the moment that portfolio has to function inside daily life. Retiree A enters retirement with a paid-off home in a moderate-cost area. Property taxes still exist. Insurance still exists. Maintenance still exists. But the largest recurring housing pressure is gone. A meaningful portion of the portfolio also sits in account types that create more flexibility when money is withdrawn. The monthly system around the portfolio is lighter. Retiree B also retires with $2 million, but the surrounding structure is heavier. There is still a significant housing payment. Insurance costs are higher. Everyday life takes place in a more expensive area, where routine spending absorbs more cash before anything discretionary even begins. A larger share of the portfolio sits in accounts where withdrawals create more visible tax friction. The total balance is the same. The lived pressure is not. This is where theory begins to separate from reality. In theory, both retirees are wealthy enough to feel broadly secure. In reality, the portfolio is not being experienced as a number. It is being experienced as a flow entering two very different systems. For retiree A, the flow lands in a structure with more breathing room. For retiree B, the flow lands in a structure where more of it disappears on contact. The first person experiences the portfolio as support. The second experiences it as maintenance. Neither case requires dramatic spending or obvious mistakes. The mechanism works even when both people are financially reasonable. That is what makes this illustration useful as proof. The difference does not come from character. It comes from conversion. Now imagine an ordinary disruption. The water heater fails. A dental procedure is not fully covered. The car needs replacement earlier than expected. For retiree A, the expense creates annoyance, but not immediate instability, because it enters a system with some available space. For retiree B, the same expense feels heavier because the monthly flow was already carrying more recurring pressure. Again, the portfolio value has not changed, but the meaning of the portfolio has changed. This is the point where resistance often begins to weaken. Many viewers hold a simple objection in their minds. $2 million is still a lot of money. That statement is true at the level of raw arithmetic. But the illustration is not denying the size of the number. It is showing that the number alone does not answer the question people actually care about. The real question is, what kind of retirement life that number can keep funding once real obligations begin to shape it? The comparison becomes clearer over time. Suppose both retirees move through the same 10 years of rising prices. Food costs drift up. Insurance rises. Home services become more expensive. Travel takes more cash than expected. Medical spending becomes more visible. This is not because one retiree understood some secret and the other did not. It is because the same portfolio entering different structures produces different emotional realities. That difference shows up not only in budgets, but also in hesitation. Retiree A may still think carefully, but ordinary spending decisions do not trigger the same internal friction. Retiree B may pause more often, even when the spending itself is not extravagant. A family visit, a home repair, or a modest trip can start to feel like a system question rather than a simple purchase. That hesitation is part of the proof. The account balance promised one feeling from a distance, but the translated monthly reality produced another. The same pattern appears when time is added to the picture. A portfolio that feels strong in year 1 may feel more conditional by year 8 if the surrounding structure keeps demanding too much from the monthly flow. A portfolio that begins with more room can continue feeling steady even without looking spectacular. The key difference is not the headline number, but the burden placed on the conversion process. That is why this comparison matters. It removes the illusion that retirement success can be read straight from a balance. Two people can arrive with the same visible wealth and still live inside very different levels of financial ease. One feels stable, one feels watchful. One sees flexibility, one sees limits. One experiences retirement as the release of working life pressure. The other experiences it as a quieter form of ongoing management. This is not a moral contrast. It is a structural one. And once that becomes clear, the original number stops looking like a complete answer. It starts looking like raw material that must still pass through the system of real life before its true meaning appears. The blind spot is not that people care too much about money. The blind spot is that they often expect the number itself to explain the future. $2 million becomes a kind of mental shortcut. It looks like certainty, so it gets treated like certainty. It looks like freedom, so it gets treated like freedom. But that is where the misunderstanding settles in. The visible balance feels like the answer, when in reality, it is only the starting material. The real issue is not whether the number is big. The real issue is what kind of life that number becomes after it passes through the structure around it. This is the shift in mental model. The portfolio is not the retirement experience. It is the input feeding the retirement experience. Once that becomes clear, a lot of common retirement language starts to sound incomplete. People talk about hitting the number as if the number contains the outcome inside it. But the outcome is produced later, through monthly conversion, recurring obligations, tax friction, and time. That is why a large balance can still leave someone feeling watchful. Meanwhile, a situation that looks smaller on paper can sometimes feel more stable if the surrounding structure is lighter. The misconception is subtle but powerful. People think comfort is stored inside the account. In practice, comfort is often stored in the relationship between the account and the life it has to carry. A portfolio with less drag around it can create more calm than a larger portfolio under heavier recurring pressure. That does not make the number unimportant. It makes the number incomplete. And once the number is seen as raw material rather than final proof, the emotional picture changes too. Retirement stops looking like a finish line defined by a balance and starts looking more like an ongoing translation process. What matters is not only how impressive the number sounds from a distance. What matters is whether the system around it turns that number into continuity, flexibility, and a lower level of everyday financial tension. That is the reframe. The problem was never only the amount. The problem was assuming the amount could speak for the life by itself. A $2 million portfolio does not reveal its meaning when it sits untouched as a number. Its meaning only becomes visible after it is translated into withdrawals, monthly pressure, and the ongoing demands of real life. That is why the balance alone rarely tells the full story. The number may look complete, but the retirement experience it creates depends on the structure carrying it over time. What appears to be wealth from a distance can feel like steadiness, caution, flexibility, or limitation once it begins moving through the system. No advice, just observation. And that observation opens into a larger question. If the balance itself is only raw material, then what is it that makes retirement feel secure when markets move, costs rise, and time keeps narrowing the margin between comfort and pressure?